Hey guys, San here with my first installment of my DM's Toolbox series, How to Write a Campaign for the Chronic Worldbuilder. Before I get into this, I just want to let everybody know I have a text version of this video, so if you're more into reading things than watching them, which, you probably read faster than I talk, you can see the link down in the description. Just do me a favor and throw a like on the video so I know that you are here. Second thing, my cats are feeling pretty rambunctious tonight. So you may see them running back and forth. I assume that's not going to be a problem because, the internet loves cats, but your mileage may vary. So with that said, let's get into this. It's super common, at least from my perspective. People have an idea. They have a setting in mind, something they've worked really hard on, sometimes for multiple years. They've fleshed it out. They're really into it. They have politics set up. They have a magic system. They have unique societal casts, and they have homebrew monsters and alien environments. They might even have a calendar. And then when it comes time to actually write a D&D campaign in that setting, they can't think of a story to tell. They can't think of where to start a plot. Or maybe you are jonesing for a genre. Maybe you really want to run a zombie apocalypse campaign, or Spelljammer, or a Wild West campaign. And as much as you want that vibe of that setting, you're having trouble figuring out a concrete story to tell within it. So, I've been a DM for 20 years, and as I said, I see this question all the time. Occasionally people will call themselves out, and they'll say, I have chronic world building syndrome. I spend tons and tons of time doing all these little details. I figured all this stuff out, but I can't write a story. And then sometimes they just find their way into a DM community and they ask, how do I write a campaign? Where do I start? How do you build a story? And because I myself am a chronic world builder, I tell them, you can start with the setting. Maybe you even should start there, because that's what compels you. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of how exactly to do this, there is a point I'd like to clarify. I don't think that world building is necessarily the best or the only way to start writing a campaign. Okay, plenty of people do it other ways. It works fine. I'm not trying to stake a position on this hill. What I am saying is that I'm a world builder. And so when I decide that I want to run a game, I start with the premise. And so if this advice isn't useful to you, you have my complete permission to go and find advice that does. My feelings aren't going to be hurt. I'm not going to be offended that I wasn't able to help you. Not everything is for everybody. But if this advice does help you, great. That's why I wrote it. So let's start with part one. What not to do. People who are writers, like me, they have a tendency to write a campaign like they would write a novel. In fact, I've heard a number of horror stories where players sort of realized that they were playing through their DM's novel, or were explicitly told that they were playing through their DM's novel. That's usually bad, and if you're not familiar, characteristics of playing through your DM's novel might include if the DM brings in NPCs, and those NPCs are like the heroes of the story. They're stronger, they're cooler, they're more heroic than the player characters, and everything they do is just better, and then the players wind up being sidekicks to the DMPCs. Another characteristic might be that the campaign is just on rails. Nothing you do can change its inexorable path. Creative, clever ideas are shut down because that's not how the plot goes, and your choices don't matter. It's devoid of player agency. And then another common pitfall that DMs who are trying to write a novel will fall into is that there's only one correct way to win. And if you don't find the correct way, which may or may not involve reading your DM's mind, then you can't succeed, no matter what you do. And I've heard of instances where that involved repeated total party kills because the party is trying and failing to figure out the DM's demented plan. And then eventually they decide that nothing they can do will work, and learned helplessness sets in. And you get extra bonus points if your DM is smiling and laughing like, the answer's so obvious. You're going to be so mad when you find it. It was right in front of your face the whole time. You might be playing through your DM's novel. So this happens so often. I made a note. This happens so often that it was directly addressed in the second Gamers movie, Darkness Rising. If you've seen it, there's a link in the description. You can watch it for free, because Zombie Orpheus is great that way. So if it's such an endemic problem in the gaming community, what should we do differently? How is writing a campaign different from writing a novel? Well, there is one key difference that defines campaign writing apart from writing a novel, which is that the DM doesn't decide how the campaign is going to end. And I'll clarify that point. As the DM, you definitely decide what the goals of the campaign should be. You definitely decide what happens if the PCs fail. So the bad ending, yeah, you decide that. But when it comes to succeeding, when it comes to winning, your players should be the ones who decide how they do that. They should be able to put their ideas, their ethics, and their motivations into the campaign, and that should drive the development of the plot. And then once the players get proactive, which you can, hope and encourage that they do, then the job of the antagonist is to react to them. Which doesn't mean that, you don't have a proactive villain, your villain's just sitting back and waiting for the heroes to do stuff. But what it does mean is that your villain's plans and tactics should change as the PCs act against them. They should be flexible. They should be able to be responsive. So whatever the PCs do, it should be move and counter move between them and the antagonist. But if you've been a dungeon master for, I think, literally any length of time, down to and including a single game, then you know that in general players have one purpose, and that is to ruin everything that you planned. I mean, if they can take it off the rails, they will take it off the rails. They will find ways to diverge in directions that you never anticipated. And part of writing a flexible campaign is being able to anticipate those digressions. So how do you do it? How do you create a plot that can change and adapt even as your players are actively carving chunks out of it? Well, that brings us to section 2. Ask the right questions. This part is, it's easy, but it's not fast. It takes time. It's not that it's difficult, but you're going to have to sit with it for a bit, and you're going to have to put some real thought into answering these questions in a rounded way, in a layered way, if that makes any sense. So what you do is you have a setting, right? And hopefully it's a setting you understand well, either because you love it like Faerun, or because you've spent time homebrewing it and you know it intimately. Whether it's homebrew, whether it's canon, whether it's complex, whether it's simple, the point is you know it and you understand it. You understand its themes. You've got the ecosystem, the politics, sort of those big influences you're very familiar with. And then if you're new to dungeon mastering, you can actually start this world building with a single town. You don't have to start with a world. If you're like me and an experienced or you're a chronic world builder, go ham, invent a calendar, decide what color plants grow on a world that orbits a white dwarf star. That was a project that I did at one point. Figure out if, you think magic spells can replicate radiation shielding. But after you've done that, then you sit with the setting and you ask yourself actually pretty simple questions. So we start with who. You'll notice the theme. There's going to be who, what, when, where, how, why, etc. Some repeated, but we're going to start with who. Who is trying to change the world? Okay. So Matt Colville, who I love, and I find his videos very helpful, very accessible as well, even to people who are totally new to the hobby. And I've got a link to the one that I'm mentioning in the description, so you can go and check that out when you're done here. He has a video about world building for Dungeon Masters, and his video talks about how the stories we tell often stem from the world that was. Like, when we start a campaign, a lot of the time it's at the end of a golden age or in the ruins of a golden age. And the reason that we do this is because those are the eras when people are passionately trying to change the world. And then we as a society, I speak as an American, but a lot of societies do this. We like to romanticize the good old days. And we do this even if objectively, like by statistical or measurable percentage, the past was actually worse than the present. We still have nostalgia for those days. Maybe because we were children and we knew less about what was going on, but it's a consistent tendency of people, of humans, to sort of long for the past. So even if you are in your setting, the world is objectively better now than it was 20 years ago, you're still going to see three contrasting forces constantly competing for control of your society. And there's going to be people who want to move forward. There's going to be people who want to go back to the good old days. And then there's going to be people who really like the way the world is right now and they want everything to stay the same. Those forces, and you can probably even think of like who's like that in our current society now, but those forces are always in tension. They're always pushing against each other. Their values are in opposition. Their view of the past, the future, the potential of the society, that's in opposition. So they're at contrasting forces. So these people are all going to have different ideas of what a good world and a good society looks like. So then you ask yourself the question, who wants to change the world the way that it is right now? One way to sort of go over this is by alignment. Good people, good aligned people, are going to be looking to change the world for the better. If you have ever been a true leftist in any way, shape, or form, you are very aware that they may not agree what better means. They may have wildly differing ideas of what a good future is. What is the right way to uplift people? What is the correct kind of society to create? But in general, good aligned people are going to want peace and prosperity for as many people as possible, along with the freedom to pursue their own interests and passions. So that can be sort of your general guideline in terms of how good aligned people tend to approach change. Lawful people, on the other hand, will be looking to make the world more orderly. If the chaos was in the past, then they may serve the new regime because at least the new regime means peace. Or if the chaos is current, they may be trying to go back to a prior lawful age. Or they might be trying to crack down and create a new lawful age. But regardless, what they're going for is an orderly existence, a predictable existence, something they understand. It doesn't necessarily have to be good. It doesn't even necessarily have to be beneficial. It just has to be manageable. And that's why sometimes you'll see lawful characters may prefer a tyrannical regime to a chaotic one, because at least under tyranny, the rules are defined. Like, they know what they can and cannot do. And they find that more reassuring than having freedom. So, going the other way, evil people are going to be looking to change the world for the worst. Not necessarily for the sake of destruction, although some of them may, but for most of them, it's going to be selfishly motivated. They want to elevate themselves, they want to get power, they want to get authority, they want to do what they want, when they want, and they want to live how they want. They don't want to be restricted in any way, shape, or form. They just want to be their degenerate selves. And so wherever they are on the law axis, whether they're lawful or neutral or chaotic, they're going to look for changes that benefit them, because usually they're going to think they're the people that deserve to benefit. And then they'll also probably have a long list of people, mooches, leeches, worthless people in society, and those people definitely don't deserve to benefit, and they should either be punished or they should be left to their own devices, and if they sink, they sink and nobody cares, and if they swim, well, it just proves that everybody could have swum if they tried, and then everybody needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I got mine, screw you. That's the evil societal change. And if that sounds familiar to any of you, feel free to do that soul searching on your own time. Chaotic people, in general, are people seeking freedom. They want to free themselves. Often they want to free others. They want to dismantle the systems that keep them bound. And even good systems that are orderly might be challenged by chaotic people because they just don't do well as cogs in the machine. And then, of course, evil orderly systems are going to be plagued by revolutionaries. That's a constant throughout history. The problem, of course, with chaotic people being that if they do succeed in toppling the system, chances are a new system's going to replace it. And they're not going to have any place in that new system because they still aren't any better at being a cog in the machine. So once the new system is in place, whether it's better or worse, the whole cycle for them starts over again. Or, sometimes they self-destruct. That happens too. But, it's for them, it's because society will naturally settle into some kind of orderliness because, people like that. And so truly chaotic people find themselves trapped in this continuing cycle of fighting the system, dismantling the system, a new system coming, and then fighting that system with varying degrees of success. So why would we start campaign building here? Why would we start with who is trying to change the world and for what reasons? And the reason is simply that I believe in general stories should be character driven. And I think that goes double for D&D stories because your friends are the main characters. And in order to facilitate your friends and their characters driving the story, you have to write a story that is built on them, a story that they can continually build as they move through it. And I hope that makes sense. Like, that seems sensible, right? That if you want a character focus, you should start with character. So when we talk about creating NPCs for this world with our question, who's trying to change the world? Obviously, there's going to be approximately two camps. There's going to be who's trying to change the world for the better, and there's going to be who's trying to change the world for the worst. Who's trying to change the world for the better is a question I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but that doesn't mean that it's a useless question. This is actually a very good question that gives you an opportunity to develop patrons and mentors for your characters. People who are trying to change the world for the better are people who can either support the PCs or who the PCs can in turn support. They can be quest givers. They are pushing their agenda for what they think a better world is by sending the player characters on quests. And that gives your world a certain amount of immersion when people are believably interacting with it, and then the PCs actually have a hand in creating the changes that they want to see, which is what we want. We want them to have that agency. So it's not a useless question. You should definitely sit and think about who's trying to change the world for the better. Take some notes, come up with some people that are going to be allies of the PCs along their path. But when it comes to actually writing the story, it is slightly more important to ask who's trying to change the world for the worse. Why? Because that person is your antagonist, and I am about to build an entire campaign around them. This is, of course, assuming that you're running a good aligned campaign. If you're running an evil aligned campaign, just switch. It works fine. In the essay version of this video, I have an example that I give. I develop a campaign in real time and write snippets of it in with the questions. I'm not going to do that for this video because I don't want it to be hella long, but if you are curious about it, you can feel free to go there. When you are asking yourself who is trying to change the world for the worst, that person should be your big bad evil guy, your BBEG, your main villain, whatever you want to call them. I'm calling them Antagonist with a capital A in this case. And that person's actions, motivations, tactics, and their circle of allies and minions, that is going to be the meat that fills out the campaign from top to bottom. So you want to choose somebody who has the ability to be a main antagonist. Whether they work their way up from the bottom or whether they're already in a position of authority, they should be someone who has either the potential or already the chutzpah to be a final boss. So examine your ideas for that quality as you're coming up with who's trying to exploit the way that the world is now, who's trying to use it for selfish reasons, who's trying to create their dream society, which would be hell for everybody else, and you're getting ideas and you're noting them down. Find the person who has the potential to really move things on like a countrywide or a continent-wide or even a worldwide level. Like, you want it to get big, because theoretically, it depends on how far you want to take your campaign. If you want to take it level 1 to 10, if you want to run it all the way to 20, if you want to go epic with it. But regardless, the villain needs to be proportionate to where you plan to end your campaign. So if you're ending it at level 10, that needs to be like a level 10 appropriate villain. If you're ending it at level 20, they need to be a level 20 appropriate villain. So keep that sort of in mind. Because as we go down the other questions, one of the things that we're going to flesh out is how exactly they're doing what they're doing, and then how the PCs come to find out about it. So after you have figured out who's trying to change your world for the worst, you have to ask yourself the second question, which is how or in what way is the antagonist trying to change the world? So to make that really simple, ask yourself, what does the antagonist want? What is their ultimate goal? What would make your setting the ideal place for them to live happily ever after? What would make them happy if they have the capability to be happy? It could be taking over the world or the kingdom or the town, depending on your scale. It could be claiming a ruler's power, a throne. Maybe they want to be king. Maybe they want to be Hierophant. Maybe they want to be a god. Hi, Aspen. Maybe they have a grudge against another species and they want to wipe them out because they perceive that species as a threat to something that they value. Maybe they want to blot out the sun, throw the whole world into icy darkness because that's where their species thrives. Or maybe they want to get a loved one back and they're willing to violate the boundaries of life and death to get that. I wrote my first nano novel on that premise with that antagonist. Establishing the antagonist goals is important because when your PCs get in the way, which they should, I'm not going to say they will because, Rails, but when they get in the way, which they should, if they're doing it right, then your antagonist is going to do whatever they have to do to keep pursuing their goals. So if the PCs ruin one thing for them, then the antagonist is going to try to switch tactics and pursue another path because that goal is always in their mind. That's the end point. That's what they're striving toward. And they're not going to give it up just because of one setback. If they did that, they wouldn't be a very good villain. They'd just be kind of a wannabe. So when your PCs interfere with their plans, the antagonist has to be able to adapt. They have to be able to be flexible, think on their feet, try something new, change their tactic, even confront the PCs directly and go straight at them. But no matter how they respond, their highest priority has to be achieving their goal. The goal has to be paramount. They're shooting for that star, and they're not going to let anybody deter them. Okay? So I, again, in the essay version, I have sort of an example of how to feel that out. But once you establish the antagonist's goal, now you ask yourself, why? So we got who, how, now we're at why. Why do they want this? Or you can even phrase it, how does this change that they're trying to make, how does it benefit them specifically? Because it should be pretty concrete. And the reason is that knowing the purpose behind your antagonist goals keeps your campaign flexible. It's sort of a crucial part of making your antagonist actually believable. Most of the realistic villains aren't actually cackling and crazed, but even if they are, the ability to take them seriously as a player who is opposing them depends on the legitimacy of their emotional or logical motivation for pursuing the goal. You got to be able to feel it, or at least understand it, in order to be compelled by it. And when I postulated this on the DM community on Reddit, several people said to me, oh, well, you can't make the villain too sympathetic or the PCs will jump ship and join them. And I said something like, okay, well, then you're just running a different campaign. just switch it then. Now the villain is the quest giver and they're trying to take the world down with them. It's happened to me. You got to roll with this stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I really want to emphasize, don't decide how the campaign's going to end. Because you're going to be disappointed or thwarted. So be flexible, keep your options open, and if your PCs do something that's totally off the map, roll with it as best you can. So even if the antagonist's reasoning is pretty skewed due to trauma, due to differences in culture, or whatever have you, there should be a nugget in there of cause and effect or of real feeling that the players can sort of understand. They can sort of grok. So if you're looking at an antagonist, you're saying, okay, well, this guy's boring. He wants power because, power is its own goal, which I don't really understand, but whatever. So ask yourself, okay, why? What is it for? Why do they want it? What's the point? What's the end game? Because power is to do something. Even if that something is just to be safe. I have so much power, no one can hurt me, is still a goal, whereas I want power really isn't. So if you find yourself with that villain, some options would be, are they frustrated by their current inability to change the world? So they're trying to gain power to make a change. Or are they angry that they have this vision and no one else can see it? And so what they're going to do is take the bull by the horns and force everybody to see their vision of this new world and how it's objectively better than, whatever they were doing. Or is there something that they're afraid of? Is there an old wound that they're suffering that like pushes them to be strong enough that nobody can hurt them again? Are they protecting someone or something? Is that power in the service of keeping something safe? So for whatever reason your antagonist is pursuing it, ask yourself why it's close to their heart. Like, why is it here? Why is it important? Because one of the definitions of a campaign antagonist is that they will almost by fiat resort to extreme measures to get whatever they're after. So, if they're going to do that, it better be important, right? So that's why I tend to take the position that an antagonist should change the world in a way that concretely benefits themselves, or in certain cases benefits like a people or a cause that they care very much about. Most villains don't actually do stuff for the lulz. You have trickster archetypes that defy that rule, but it's usually not a good enough motivation to become the BBEG of a campaign, because doing that's kind of a huge expenditure. Like becoming an arc villain, becoming a dark lord, that's time, effort, resources, money, minions. You have to really want that. And when you pursue it, again, by definition, you are taking an enormous risk, because once someone finds out what you're doing, they're going to try to stop you violently if necessary. And assuming that your campaign goes right, that's what the PCs are going to do. They're going to find out what the antagonist is doing, and they're going to try to murder them. So, if they're going to take that risk, if they're going to expend that amount of effort, risk their life, their reputation, the love of their friends, their family, their place in their culture, whatever fortune they may have, all of it, if it's all going to ride on this, then whatever this is had better be really freaking important. So when you take the time to consider your antagonist motivations and like what they're striving towards, your campaign is going to benefit from the role-playing opportunities that you can provide with a fleshed out antagonist. So as a dungeon master, you are helping yourself when you ask this question of the BBEG, and even of their major minions, like their middle management, they're like, dragons, they're mini bosses. Ask yourself, like, what motivated them to choose this method of trying to change the world? Like, why did they pick this guy or this girl to serve? What is it about their vision that compels them? So when you give your primary antagonist minions and allies whose beliefs and their goals they match, that helps foreshadow the antagonist's motivations, because in general, I mean not always, but in general, your PCs will probably encounter those middle managers and the minions before they encounter the antagonist. So by the time they reach your big bad evil guy, they should have a decent idea why they're doing what they're doing, because they worked their way up through a hierarchy of other people who either shared this vision or like were close enough to it with their own reasons that they decided to all come together under this banner. And once again, I have a more detailed and concrete example of that in the essay. So now let's move on to question 4. You know your antagonist, you know their goal, and you know why their goal is really important to them. So important that they would risk everything to pursue it. So at this point, we're going to get into logistics. And I do realize that, some people are better at this than others. Not everybody has a body of knowledge to sort of instinctively understand logistical implications. Fortunately, this is something that's actually really easy to research on the internet. These are things that a wiki dive is actually really good for. So if you find yourself struggling with logistical questions, there are a couple different things you can do. One of them is to ask other writers who write in your genre. And if you go in writing communities and you find people who write in the genre, usually they're willing to take questions and they're willing to, help you think through the effects that certain actions are going to have from the top on down. And then the other thing that you can do is look up historical instances of similar things that have occurred. Now, obviously, D&D being magic, there's not going to be exact matches, but we've had plenty of different kinds of evil empires, evil burgomeisters, we've had the Inquisition. So there are lots of examples that you can draw from when bad people get into power and look at how that power shook out from top to bottom. Like what it actually looked like on the ground. So as far as things to research go, this is one of the easier ones. And that brings us to question 4. What does the antagonist need to pursue their goals? Okay? What do they need? And when we think about what they need, I'm talking like really concrete. An army marches on its stomach. Man does not live by bread alone. So if your antagonist has big plans, then they need, hi Aspen, big resources in order to accomplish those plans. You need to ask yourself, what is needed in order for success to be achieved here? So maybe your villain needs an army. Okay, maybe they need 5 pieces of an ancient artifact, which, if reunited, grant the bearer unlimited power. Maybe they need that. Maybe they need a cult that's strong enough to undermine existing governments. Or maybe they need a cult that's big enough that they can sacrifice it all at once to create enough power to bring a god or a demon into the world to wreak havoc. Okay? Maybe they need money. maybe they want a noble title. Or they need it for the authority to do what they want to do. Maybe they're trying to get a throne away from the current holder, leadership of a country, or a barony, or a march. Whatever they need, there are going to be steps they have to take to get there, and they're going to need stuff. So when you look at your antagonist goals and motivations, work from the top down. Take an example. If we need 5 pieces of an ancient artifact, okay, then what does the villain need in order to get those? Well, starting very simply, they need to find the pieces. Makes sense, right? First they need to locate them. Then they need to excavate the pieces. Wherever they are, wherever they've been for the last, 3,000 years, they have to dig them out or work them free or bargain with the dragon for them or whatever, but they have to get them out. After they've done that, they need to bring all the pieces together in one place. And while doing that, they need to make sure that the pieces do not fall into the wrong hands. Because if they lose one, they're SOL, right? So, just as an example, let's look at how someone might do that. Okay. If they need to find the pieces, and the pieces are scattered, let's say, in the 5 directions. We'll go Chinese mythology with this. Let's say the pieces are scattered in the 5 directions. So what they would need to do is maybe they need to research historically where the omphalos of each direction, sorry, that's a Greek term, we're mixing mythos now, of each direction is, the linchpin, the arrow in the map. What does the 5 directions mean? Is there an ancient monastery that's there? Is there a sacred mountain? Is there a home that used to belong to a god? Is there the lair of a dragon? What is the centerpiece, the navel of, east, west, north, south, and center? So first they have to figure that out. And then once they have a general idea, they're going to need to search those areas. Well, the villain is only one person, right? So it's going to take for frickin' ever for them to do it by themselves. So they need people. And the people need to know what they're searching for, which means they also need to be loyal. So you can sort of see how we're taking the goal, which is to find the 5 pieces of the artifact, and we're thinking about it from a concrete standpoint. What does the villain need to make this happen? And then we figure out our next question. It's not the second question. It's actually the 5th question. And it is how. We're back to how. I told you there'd be repeats. How does the antagonist get what they need? This is a continuance of the logistical inquiry. We've determined what they need in order to achieve their goals, but now they have to actually get their hands on it. And the reason why this question is important is that it defines the opportunities for the PCs to encounter the antagonist's actions. So, like, think about that a little bit. Like, if your antagonist, let's go back to the 5 pieces example. The antagonist needs to dig up the pieces of a lost artifact. We talked about that. Well, maybe they found it and they have to excavate it, like literally excavate it. So how do they do that? Well, maybe they're going to purchase the land and start a mining concern, okay? And then, because a mine would give them a reason to be digging around in the hills that's not super suspicious. And then if they're going to establish a mine, they need people to work the mine, right? So they hire a bunch of ignorant, innocent local workers, people who are just trying to make a paycheck. They have no idea what's going on. They don't know they're working for an evil villain, although depending on the mine safety regulations, they may know. And then those people are the engine that is digging for these pieces of the artifacts. Okay, but what happens if these ignorant locals stumble across the artifact? Like, what happens then? Well, that's where the bad guy needs to have his loyal middle managers who are in the know in charge of the mine. So the miners aren't necessarily minions, but the foreman, he's definitely a minion. He knows what's up, and his job is there to make sure that the true purpose of the operation remains secret and secure, and that if anything of interest is discovered, it is promptly delivered to the right hands. So, and as a side effect, the mines could also produce valuable ore, because everything runs on money, and anything that they can actually take out of those mines, even if it's not the artifact, could help them continue to finance their efforts to find the other pieces. So, like, win-win, right? So let's try a different example. What if your antagonist is looking to raise an army? How are they going to go about that? A necromancer. They might find battlefields or graveyards so that they can have easy access to corpses to make undead. But you may notice, in 5e, a necromancer can only control so many undead by themselves. So they're not going to be able to raise individually an army, but they can bring other necromancers together under their banner, and those necromancers can each control their squad, and together all the squads could be a legion, and then together several legions could be an army, right? Well, then we have another problem. First of all, how do you attract other necromancers to your cause? And then second, how do you keep those people loyal? Like, how do you make sure they're obedient? Like, they're in this with you. And they're not, like, backstabbing and undermining you from within. There should be somebody backstabbing and undermining, because that's always super interesting. But, in general, you don't want that. So, in order to get the resources that they need to achieve their goals, the point I'm trying to make here is that the antagonist, they have to interact with the rest of the world. It's not voluntary. An exchange has to exist, okay? They have to pay money to hire mercenaries. They have to take dead bodies in order to get undead soldiers, or they have to gather souls to power a lich's phylactery. But the point is, nothing is free. And the antagonist has to give something up to the rest of the world in order to gain what they want from it. And that interaction, that is the weak spot, okay? That is where the adventurers can stumble across their plan. So, like, once you've decided the most reasonable, the most logical method for the antagonist to pursue their goals, then you zoom in and you look at how those methods are going to affect the rest of the world. Which, if I'm not mistaken, brings us to question 6. This is the last one. We're at the end here. I know this has been a long video. And because it's the last one, we combined several of our key words. When, where, and how do the antagonist's efforts intersect the lives of the player characters? Okay, did I go too fast? When, where, and how does what the antagonist's doing intersect the lives the PCs are trying to live? Okay. And the reason this is the last question is because it's honestly the most important, because this is where your plot starts. And all the questions we've had so far have been leading up to this. They've been preparing us for this, giving us the information we need so that we can establish this. This is where the plot hooks are. And I know that plot hooks are another difficulty. A lot of people really struggle with plot hooks. You know, even if you have a plot, how the hell do I get the PCs into this plot? How do I hook them? Well, this is how you hook them. This is how you figure out how to build a hook. So, if you've been with me so far, you know who your antagonist is. You know what their goals are. You know why they want to achieve those goals. And you have a basic understanding of how they're interacting with the rest of the world to get what they need so they can achieve those goals, right? And then, like I just said, that interaction is where your party can become aware of the antagonist's activities. If you have done your work correctly, if you've gone from the top to the bottom, then you should know what your antagonist efforts are going to look like on a very small, very local sort of town type level. And the reason we want to focus on that is because that's where most campaigns begin. Because level 1, or if you start at level 3 characters usually can't handle threats that are much bigger than a town or a local area. So you want to make sure that what your antagonist is doing has concrete effects on the area where the PCs are starting. They have a presence there, even if it's not them personally, okay? So starting level 1 or level 3, you start with a town, you start with a valley, you start with a single district inside a city, and then the players solve the problems that occur in that area, in that confined area, and then they branch out as they level up. So obviously when you're doing your campaign, you'll have a few random things. You'll have some random quests so that, you know, they're not railroaded. They can choose some things to explore. You know, you might throw something carnivorous in the lake. You might have a rumor of a plague starting in the Narrows. You might have a little starter dungeon that used to be a basement and now it's full of goblins or whatever. But when you are ready for them to actually bite on your story arc that will take them to their higher levels, what you want them to do is run face first into the antagonist's minions while they're scurrying around doing their minion things, okay? So going back to a previous example, our antagonist has decided to start a mining company in order to secretly dig for the pieces of the artifact, right? So how could the PCs run into that mining operation and start suspecting that something isn't right here? So, you know, spitballing a few suggestions, let's say mining for the artifact is allowing magical leakage from the artifact because it's so powerful into the environment. Okay, suddenly creatures have begun to mutate, become strangely aggressive, and the PCs, you know, they fight several of these creatures and realize there's a single contaminant that's causing all this behavior, and then now they have to track it back to its source, which of course is the artifact hidden in the mine shaft. Another idea. What if someone close to the PCs, like a parent, sibling, uncle, whatever, works the mines until their untimely death. Mining is a super risky profession. But then the foreman, who, as I said before, that's one of the big bad's evil managers. They know what's going on, right? At least to a certain extent. And they're being super cagey and trying to, like, cover up the incident. They're not going to let the miners dig any bodies out, or they're not going to let anybody enter that spur of the mine. They claim that it's not safe, but they won't tell you exactly why. So the PCs are, wanting justice for this person, and as they're investigating the issue, they notice or they're told that the foreman and some other shady characters, minions, have been spotted slipping in and out of the mine in the dead of night. So in trying to solve the mystery of this loved one's death and punish whoever is responsible, then, that suspicious behavior is going to draw them into the main plot. Let's try another idea. The mining operation runs into some trouble. It could be, well, it's a mine, so it could be drow. It could be droiger. I've never pronounced that correctly, so, just forget that I said it. It could be deep gnomes, okay? Maybe something that's not civilized. Maybe it's a hook horror or an Umberhulk. But either way, the big bad's middle managers have come up against something they cannot solve on their own. But they could certainly hire some expendable adventurers to take care of the problem and then, double-cross them. Unless they turn out to be especially useful or loyal. So, now we have a hook where the enemies are directly bringing the PCs in. And the PCs have to uncover the conspiracy with their own quest givers. So that's a slightly higher level of intrigue that you could definitely use. So once you start looking at these interactions, how do the antagonist minions and their goals and their progress toward their goals, all these little interactions with the world, how do they change the PC's environment? It's a thread, and you find a thread that you like, and you keep unraveling it until you've unraveled a very large sweater. And that's a hook. That's what a plot hook is. It's a thread that the PCs keep pulling, and as it unravels, they start seeing a bigger and bigger pattern. So as a conclusion, I have the concluding example again in the essay, and I went ahead and I wrote sort of a sample gameplay that obviously is just, I just wrote it and threw it together. It didn't actually happen. But it's just an example of how to create a starter quest that sort of hooks into a bigger campaign. That once they get to the end of that starter quest, the reveal is that there's actually something much bigger going on, and that something much bigger, of course, leads directly up the chain to the antagonist. So feel free to go and read that if you have time. But now we have reached the end. Those are the questions that you have to ask in order to get your setting, your world building work to generate a plot for you. And I truly believe that you will find it much easier to do if you start from the perspective of who is trying to change the way the world is now, and then unravel that. Just drill down into it, and all the implications of it, the nuts and bolts, the way that it works from a nation level or a world level or continent or however big you're going to get, all the way down to the local level, which is where the PCs at their low level are going to encounter it. So, like I said, I have a full demonstration in the essay. Link is down below in the description, along with a couple of different resources, including Matt Colville's video. And feel free to leave a comment. And then also, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and leave them, and I will get to them whenever I'm able. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you guys for the next tool in the DM's toolbox.